All right, so this is the the day one in our JavaScript, and we are going to build one to-do list, and we are going to implement HTML, CSS, and JavaScript for that. Right, so let's start with one first HTML web page, that is to-do list.html, and right. So I'm not going to use the shortcut. Let's type doc type HTML, and then followed by HTML. Inside HTML we have head and body. So we are ready with the structure. Okay, so in that HTML, even in the body, we have different tags. That is navigation bar, or you can say footer is there. So in between, there is one aside, and basically navigation bar and footer and aside. These are like navigation bar is for having menu over the top, and aside this is the mobile view, as we can see, like the small screen. But when it comes to PC, it should be having something like this, right? So uh, aside will be somewhere it will be placed around this, like we have some advertisements, or we can have some extra links over there. And the footer is for footer links is also there. So footer basically it's coming at the end of the web page, and copyright and sign up for newsletter, all those things like in footer. And navigation bar, definitely that navigation bar comes at the top. So let's for navigation on the top, aside footer, and the main thing it comes under section. It's not mandatory, guys. Again, we can directly use another tag that is called as div tag. Okay, so div tag is basically it helps us to organize the code. For example, in the first div tag I can say user input, and this is just a comment. So if I just highlight and just press control slash, so we can identify from here till here, like it user input. And so in order to recognize, and it's a kind of container. In this we are going to add all the input and button fields. And for for providing hint, we can use placeholder. It will be displaying inside the input. So enter to do, and as well as a button, so that we can trigger some JavaScript function which is going to add the to do in the list. So add, right? So there is one div and another one. Here I can say to do list items, and here again I'm making it as a comment. So comment, it will not be visible when when I run this. You'll be able to see that these lines are not visible in the browser. So that's are nothing but comments. So we are just using it to identify this particular block is for user input, and it's for it's also helpful for the developers who are going to join us later on. Then without saying anything, they can easily understand our code because we have proper documented comments. And in here we are going to add to do items. So let's say firstly I will add one item, and for that we can use unordered list or ordered list. So there are two types of list. One is unordered list. For unordered list, it will be adding some dots before the item, and for ordered list it will be adding 1 2 3. So if order is if order is mandatory, then we can use uh, ordered list. If there is some purpose of each and every number, step by step approach is there, so that in that case we can use orders. But generally for these kind of infinite list, like when the number of items is not fixed, then we can use unordered list. So let's run this. So I have installed the extension live server yesterday. So with that we can launch our application. So we have got it, right? So with CSS we can make it much better looking. But now our basic agenda is when we click on add button, it should keep on adding all the to do items inside the to do list here. So to do list items in this div, whatever I'm adding, it should be adding inside this UL, right? Let's implement JavaScript and CSS for this basic looking to-do list. So for that, I'm going to keep these two things aside. And if I wanted to change color, and I want to make it in the center, all these things are there, right? So user will be feeling convenient with that. So for that, let's implement the CSS first. So we got to know about basic tags like navigation bar, section, div, UL, li, and HTML comments, footer. We'll use all these tags. So let's use style tag in HTML where we can add CSS, and we also have to provide a title to our application to do list. with this, we have got the title, and now I'm going to implement CSS. For that, I have style tag. And basically, first let's color the button and let's provide some space. And we don't want, the content to stick to the walls like that. Let's create some space. For that, I wanted to, add some space over here. Can you see this? And I also wanted to, make this one, I wanted to add some shadow to my application like this. So all the content lying inside the section, right? User input as well as to-do list items. So let me just add some border to the main section, right? So I'm going to implement some CSS using the tag name. So there are like multiple ways we can provide CSS. Like I can use tag name to change the CSS, or I can use ID and classes. So let's use tag, and I have border. I wanted to add some border 1 pixel. And I need to use what type of border I want, whether I want dashed, dotted, or solid border. So there are different types of borders we can use. And even we can use color. So I can use gray color, lighter than the black, right? So with this we have got a border. So I'm getting some messages, I think. Yeah, hello. All right, so now I have this section. Inside the section I have the user input div, and the as you can see here, I have the user input div as well as the to-do list items, right? So I wanted to, make these to-do list items a little bit, much prettier. So for that, what's the tag name? It's li, right? So for li, I can use li, and I can remove the dot from here. I can, use borders. So let's use border first. So it will be separating one item from another. Border 1 pixel, again solid. Let's use gray again. uh, we can also use border hyphen bottom, like if I wanted to use, only implement it for one space. So you can see border bottom. I can use border top, border left, any type of border we can use for one particular side, right? So this is how we can implement borders. So hope these things are like new to you. Like we have the border ready, and I wanted to remove the dots. So for that, we can have list decoration properties, list style type. It's basically by default it's getting dot, and if I say none, we are removing those dots. And now I want some space between each item. So for that we use margins and paddings. So margin, let's apply margin first. You'll be able to grab it to let's say 10 pixel margin. So you can see there is some space over there. And I'll use border instead of border bottom to represent this. So you can see when I implement margin, it's creating some space outside the box of our item. Now if I create 30 pixel, you can see inside the box it's still, sticking to the walls, but there is some extra space added outside the wall. But what if I wanted to add some extra space within these borders? That's called as padding. And we can use padding 5 pixel, so that we have got some extra space. Now it's not looking congested. Now we don't need 30 pixel. I just used it to represent margin. Now we have margin and padding ready. And you can also add some shadow, you just need to type shadow. And for that, there are like how much should be the intensity and all. So we can say 2 pixel, 2 pixel. And there are three measures. And then you can also specify the color. Okay, so this is how, it's easy to just add shadow. So if I, increase the intensity of this middle one, it will be getting more blurred. It will be getting more wider. That kind of, measures are these. So if I make it 5 pixel, you can see the blur radius is getting increased. So we can make it much blur. And we can reduce the height and width. And we can reduce the alpha property, like it will be less visible rather than. So this is how, we can provide shadow. So now we have, basic looking to do items ready. Let's style our button and input, and then we can go ahead to implement JavaScript, right? So let's implement padding and margin to our input. So now the input field will be slightly better if we apply some, border and padding. So let's make some padding, 5 pixel padding, or we can also use 10 pixel, much better margin. And again, the margin, if I implement margin, let's say all the side, then like this, it's implementing, but I don't want to implement at all the sides. What I can do is I can implement margin only on the top, like this, margin top and margin left, because I want the button to be to be with input, not, I don't want any space between the button and the input. So that's the reason I'm explicitly adding margin top and left, so that the button and input should be there. And this particular margin also we can reduce. So margin 20 pixel, right? So instead of that, margin bottom we can use, so that these inputs, it will be at the very beginning, right? So now we have slightly better looking input. And if we wanted to change the border as well, we can also change the border. Let's say border again like 1 pixel solid blue. So all these things, like we are going to implement using Bootstrap. But let's understand why we are using border, margin, padding, and all this stuff. Now let's style our button. So it's time to change the styling of button. For that, let's firstly add padding. Again 10 pixel here, and I can make padding top and bottom 10 pixel. I want to make it much wider. So the first property is 10 pixel like this. And you can explicitly add width as well. So you can change width of any item. Let's say wanted to change the width 150 like this, or if it is more than the required, then we can reduce the width. And if we wanted to change the background color, let's say I wanted to add blue color, but not that blue. I wanted to make it slightly transparent. And the color of the text inside the button should be white. So for that, I'm going to use white. So I don't want this black border across my button, so I can say border none. So we got without border. And I wanted the shadow. So there is another property, like when we hover on it. So button hover. So when we hover on the button, it should create some shadow. So box shadow we can use, box shadow. And here I want just 1 pixel shadow. And as I said, there are 3 intensities. One is for blur radius, one should be how much should be in the bottom and all. Then I wanted to add the color of the shadow. So now we can see, if I hover, it has some effect, right? So 2 pixel and 5 pixel slightly much visible. This is how we add the shadow. And now we have the input, and we will increase the width of the input, so that it will be occupying almost the 80% of the width. 80% is more than the required. 70 is better. All right guys, so now we have got 70% width. And we can also try 75 or 73. That's it. So it seems much better. And I don't know what the extra space before this UL item. So for that, I can use for UL, I can override some properties, like UL tag is holding all the li tags, unordered list and list items. So every UL tag, it provides some extra space by default, like this. We can override this by default, its default property, by saying like margin and padding 0. So UL padding and margin is 0. So now you can see that the items are all right. So padding, I'll be using 10 pixel, so that it will be at all the sides. And margin, I'll be only using for top. Margin 0, margin 0, and explicitly I just want margin at the top, that is 20 pixel. So these are like basic stuff we have to use in CSS. And now let's come to the part of JavaScript. So with this basic implementation, we got to know about padding, margin, border radius, width, border shadows, and color, background color. And we'll get to know about more CSS syntaxes in upcoming programs. So let's implement JavaScript. So for that, we have script tag. And in order to check whether JavaScript executes or not, let's say hello. You can see like the pop-up message when I reload, that is nothing but alert, right? So in JavaScript, it's not mandatory to add semicolon like this, but it's a good practice. You can add semicolon, and it optimizes your code definitely with this semicolon. So even if I don't add semicolon, it won't be creating any error like in C++, PHP, in other programming, Dart. So we need that semicolon, but in JavaScript it's not mandatory. So let's write the JavaScript. The basic agenda is whatever I'm typing inside the input and clicking on add button, it should be adding those items in the to-do list. Okay, so let's understand JavaScript. I have some PPT for that. Let's go through some theory part at least for 5 to 10 minutes so that you'll be feeling confident, and then we'll get back to the application. All right, let's cover some basics in JavaScript. Are you there with me, guys? So some sort of silence is there. Let's start. Hello, please put on mute. Yeah, so is the PPT visible, guys? Hello, please drop a message. Yes. All right, so we have JavaScript as a module 1, and then we'll be going into backend programming. So in JavaScript we have these topics: introduction, client side model, execution, variables. So we have already introduced JavaScript, that it's a client side scripting language, which means it executes in user's browser, and we can build interactive features. Like yesterday we had one feature where user is typing email, and after clicking on button, email is getting alert. So all the interactive features in our web page are built using JavaScript, and JavaScript can control all the HTML items. Like we can delete any HTML tag using JavaScript. We can add, that's called as like document object model, where we can access any HTML tag, and inside the tag how many attributes are there and all. So right now we are going to implement one of the syntax of document object model. It's basically to work with HTML, and here is an example where exactly JavaScript stands. So in our application, JavaScript is running at client side. So the client side and server side model should be known to all of us. Server side is having all the code actually where Python executes and database is there, and client side is our application and end user we're accessing. So this is client and server side, and where we are executing JavaScript is exactly in browser, right? We are just executing HTML file. Along with the HTML file, we are executing JavaScript in Chrome browser. And some basic concepts like variable, we are going to use some variable now. Variable, it is storing our values in some in some memory location, and we are able to access it using that variable name. Let's say I wanted to store 10, and the value, the variable name I have given x. So wherever I wanted to access this value, I can call x, right? Now 10 is having another name called x. It's having some storage in our memory, or whatever it is, and you can access this variable. So let's say user ID, name, email, or anything we can save in variables, and we can use the same variable everywhere in the program constantly. That's it. And there are like different ways of declaring variables. So let's create one variable over here, and var x is equals to 10. And if I wanted to print this variable value in Google Chrome, I can use console.log x. So whatever I'm writing inside console.log, it will be visible in the browser. So let me show you here. If I open developer tools, like here we can see 10 over there. All you need to do is right click and click on inspect, then you'll be opening the developer console, and here we are getting value 10. So whatever value we are adding inside the variable, we are able to access it for the later purpose. So now in our case, we are going to add one variable to in the to do item, right? So let's say var to do is equals to do 1, and console.log to do, right? So we are getting to do like this. We can store the variable, and the another way of creating variable is let and const. Let to do is there, and it's also saving the variable. We'll understand the purpose of it. And another way is doing const. So const let's say to do item So there is a purpose of using, different to do items like this. So for let, we cannot use the name which is already been defined, to do list item. So the purpose is, basically variable can be, modified, and the same name can be used again and again. Let is something which we can change the value, but we cannot use the same name again. For variable, we can reuse the variable name. Let's say I can use to do, and again I can use to do like this. So it's not creating any error. With let, I cannot reuse the same name. Here you can see there is let, and I cannot use the same name like this. So it's creating error that it's already been declared. But what I can do is, I can override. So now I'm not providing let variable. I'm just modifying the existing variable. So I'm just making it to do two, and it's not getting printed because I'm not doing console.log. So if I just do console.log to do item, so we are able to basically modify the item in let, but we are not able to use the same name, right? So let's make it comment with double slash. And what is about like const? Const, does not support, even we cannot change the value, and we cannot even use the name again. So it strictly, stops the program whenever we use the same name, when const is already defined, but we are again defining with the same name. So const is generally used, let's say user id. So we want the user id to be same throughout the program. In the beginning, user id is something else, and after 10-20 lines, user id is different. We cannot go with that standard, right? We should have some standard. So user id, if we want to be same throughout the program, we are using const. Uh, and if we want, the value to be updated and to be modifiable, we can use var. So in const, we cannot even use the same name, and we cannot even modify the value of that variable. So see here, assignment to constant variable. So we cannot even assign a value to existing const variable. So there are like different ways of declaring variables, right? So that's enough for today. You just got to know about variables, and there are like different data types and functions. But we'll go through those theory part later on. I'm going to implement something today, that is to-do list items, right? So whatever I'm typing inside it, let's say to do one, and clicking on button, it should be adding that inside the array or inside the list. So I'm going to remove these dummy items now, and what I'm going to use is, I'll just show you. Let's say here I have one item to do, and let's add this item to our array. So instead of to do, I'm just saying ABC over here. And now in order to add this ABC, let's take an example that it's a to-do list item, and I wanted to add that item to the unordered list. For that, I need some unique ID to this UL, and using this attribute ID, I can perform any action on this particular tag, like adding new items, deleting items, or whatever it is. So this is, list item, where we are adding all the under unordered list, and inside that we have list items. So I have to add those list items. So the basic syntax for that, as I said, we are going to implement one document object model. So document dot get element by id, and we have given one id. So in this particular element, I wanted to add something new. So let's say the property of that inner html of that should be, getting something. Let's say I'll just override the inner html to empty. So you can see it has deleted that item, right? I'll just expand it a bit like this, and so you can see basically inner html equal to 0, it's deleting everything inside it. And if I say inner html equal to do, you can see there is one to do getting added, right? So here, instead of saying inner html equal to do, what I can say, I can copy this dummy list item, and I'll place it here. So now you can see that item is getting added using JavaScript, where in HTML we don't have any item inside the UL. So if I repeat this line twice or thrice, we can see there are like more items getting added. But the same item is getting overridden, like equal to equal to equal to. That means it's actually occupying the existing content. So if I just say plus or equal to, that means like whatever the existing content is there, plus or equal to is nothing but inner HTML, whatever it is there, just add few more content. So it's incrementing, in other words. So is it yeah. All right, so you can see like I have added 3 to do items using JavaScript. To do 1, to do 2, to do 3, right? So now we know that how to add one item using JavaScript. Simply just document dot get element by ID and passing the ID of that particular element where we wanted to add the item. So to do items is nothing but this particular ID, and in that ID I am going to pass this li, right? Initially it was directly written inside the li, but I haven't added those li's now inside it. Now we are pushing it from JavaScript. So now we wanted to remove the static content. Instead of taking this static content, I want whatever user has entered, right? So let's remove these two, and now I will take this ABC in place of that 2 to 1. So how we can do that? One easy way of doing that is use backticks. So backtick is something which is above the tab button beside the one. So this backticks, using this backticks, what you can do is you can pass the dynamic variables like this. So now whatever I'm writing inside the variable, we can see like the item is getting the dynamic content now, right? So the other way of doing that is using plus sign, but I'll show you the problem with that is if we wanted to add like 3 to 4 dynamic variables within the HTML string like this, with this double quotations, it will be firstly it will not identify the variable name. It will treat this just as a string or content. All right, so now in order to make this as a dynamic, I have to break the string, and then I have to use this plus sign, which is much simpler way of doing that is using backtick and dollar curly brace. Inside that you can pass a variable name. So let's comment the second way. We'll follow the first way like that, and I'm removing comments. So the benefit of using that backtick is you can also add multi-line string like this. You can add you can break the string to the next line, and I'll show you. So if you are having to add more than a line of content, then let's say the to do is repeated twice. So it's nothing but I'm adding two variables. It might be one can be title and another can be subtitle like this, right? So as many as possible dynamic variables we can write inside our HTML string, and we'll just say inner HTML plus or equal to like this, and it is getting added to the div, right? So now we don't want to write even the ABC like this. We want the user to write this, right? We are asking the user to type something in this. So in order to access whatever user has entered in the input, again we need one ID to access the content, as we did the same for UL. We used one ID and we are using input tag, and for that now let's say user underscore input. Now I'm going to access whatever user has entered. For that, instead of taking this, again document dot get element by ID, again the ID whatever I wanted to access, and there are different attributes. For input we are able to access value of input, and for the tag we are able to override the inner HTML. So these are like multiple properties we can access, and as you can see like it's executing the code, but the empty value is getting added because there is no value. By default also we can add some value like this, value is equals to a b c, that will be getting added. So you can see there is some value entered, but it's not the case now. We want the user to click the button and then only we are going to add, right? So for that we are going to use on click, and we are going to create a function add item like this. So it's nothing but instead of directly triggering these 2 lines of code, whenever I want to execute it. I don't want to execute it whenever I reload the page. Like whenever I click on the button, then only these 2 lines of code should be getting executed. So see, these two lines will not be executed until and unless I call this function. Let's take an example. I'll say alert function called. So initially, like when we reload the page, that alert was getting executed. Alert function called and function add input. So alert, if alert is not coming, that means like there might be some error. See here, unexpected end of input. That means we are simply missing one, semicolon or something over here. So for function, like we have after the line, we have to add the curly braces. Basically, it was the error due to this tag, and now I'm going to take it to the same line, and let's make it wider. All right, so these two lines of code, it will be executed only when I click on add button. And now you can see the function called alert is executing without doing anything. But when I put it inside the function, it won't be getting executed until I click the button. So now I will do something like I will say to do one, and then I'll click on this. Now the function is getting called, and again the item is also getting added, right? So this is how we step by step break down our requirement into steps, and then we come up with final outcome. So now I'm able to add as much as possible items. So the to-do list is ready. So to do 3, to do 4. So it's very basic. There are multiple other features like deleting to do items, editing, and validating that the item is already added, sorting. So if we make it more advanced, like there are much more things to do, but our basic agenda for today is completed. That is, we are trying to add one item to to-do list, and we implemented basic css, html tags, and javascript for this particular example, right? So what the like whenever I have added the item, I wanted to make this input empty. That's required for every input, like even in WhatsApp when we send the message, even in any other chatting or other form fields, we have that input, the input should get empty, right? So for that, I'm going to use the same syntax again, document.get element by id, and then value is equals to empty. So it's just removing the value inside the input after adding it to the li. So now let's see to do one, and once I add, the input is getting reset to do 2,